Blair, the founder and director of Korean Image Archive, volunteer-run institution that exists to collect, preserve and provide access to historic Korean images discovered in the United States. You're also a semi-retired filmmaker and back in the motherland here in South Korea for the first time in 5 years. It's great to meet you, Blair.
Great to meet you.
Let's start, if we can, please, with the story of your grandmother, your grandfather, and the apples, please.
Yeah, that's a great place to start because the archive is very intertwined with my family history. So if you want to take it back to the 30s, over in Utah, there was a young man born to a family of farmers. And then here in South Korea, in Seoul, there was, at the time, a baby, just young woman born to a typical Korean family. Now, I know for him, he had kind of stayed just in the same area his whole life for a while. On my grandmother's side, though, she's from Seoul originally, near Chunggu, Seoul Station area. That's where she grew up. But then, because of the Japanese occupation, her family actually ended up moving to Shanghai for a bit. And so I don't know the whole history of there, but I know that some of the independence movement was located in Shanghai. So maybe there was a connection. Maybe that's something that I'll eventually figure out what the exact impetus was one day. But I just know that she was there for a while until the occupation ended. They had returned, stayed in Seoul for a bit until the Korean War started, and at that point they ended up moving down south to Cheonan, I believe. So that's where she had stayed, and her family was safe and stayed together throughout the entire war. After that ended, they moved back up to Seoul, and eventually, I don't quite know why, but her family ended up moving or relocating to Incheon, Bupyeonggu specifically. Now, around that same time, this would have been, let's say, 57, my grandfather had the young man. He had signed up with the U.S. Army, probably just looking for ways to improve his lot in life, right? Being a farmer is very difficult, and at that time, joining the military was a really good way to kind of improve your standards of living. So he had signed up, and they sent him off to Incheon, Bupyeong. So he was kind of an artist as a hobbyist, but then for his day job, he was like a helicopter mechanic. That's what he was for the military. And it was going to be very difficult for him to bring over things like easels and paints and all that, but he did bring over a camera. And so when he was walking around the Ascom City military base, he was just taking pictures kind of the local neighborhood. Maybe it reminded him of his hometown, the kind of like rural environment. At the same time, my grandmother, the young woman, her family had opened up a grocery store. That's how they kind of got by after the war. And so she would work there every day and help out. Now, with the apples, I suppose what happened was he was walking around, said, I really want some fresh fruit. Here's a nice-looking store, and they have all these delicious-looking apples. And, oh, by the way, here's a beautiful young woman. Maybe I should talk to her. So, according to my grandmother, he would stop by, if not every single day, almost every single day, to get an apple. One thing led to another. They started talking. They started dating. They got married. My uncle was born here a few years later. My mom was also born in Korea. And then they took off to the U.S., where my grandmother and that side of my family has lived ever since.
Wow. Over apples.
Over apples.
And the camera. It must have been, do you have any sense of what it was like at that time in 57, 58? Because this is a long time back, and the country, every place has transformed so incredible. What sense do you get of the environment that they were living in?
The biggest or the simplest way I could describe it is to say it was just an agrarian culture, right? Maybe manufacturing hadn't quite started up yet. I believe that was something maybe later in the 70s and 80s, but at that time, 57 to 61, when my grandfather was here, and then the Korea that my grandmother knew, it was very much an agrarian society. I remember her telling me about growing up after the workday, everyone would kind of hang out in the local neighborhood. There was probably some meeting place, and the women would all play some card games or listen to the radio, sing as well, like just communal songs, and then the men would be off playing mahjong and drinking soju. But that's kind of how life was, and it, in some ways, it's not recognizable. And I say that not just from seeing these old images and then having the experience of living in Korea myself, but from talking with my grandmother and seeing the photos and her saying, oh yeah, I've seen some videos of what Korea looks like now, and it's unrecognizable to me because she left 60 years ago and she never came back. Wow. And to think how much it did change and going from this kind of agrarian society where most people are farmers to now it's a technology-based society, right?
Yeah.
And people are working office jobs, and it's just completely different. But to think that that happened in just a few generations is astounding. So for her, I know anytime I come back to Korea, she always says to take some pictures, but then she also says, oh, if I went over there, I couldn't find my way around anywhere. I would be completely lost, not have a clue where to go, what to do, just because, imagine if back in the day, there's a Sakori, an intersection with the 4 streets, but you can see all the way to the distant mountains. And nowadays, that view is obscured by these buildings that are maybe in some cases just as high as the mountains. So it's gone through quite a change in a very short amount of time.
It's quite a personal question, but is there, your grandmother hasn't come back for 60 years? Any reason? I mean, flights are difficult and expensive. It's not easy to sit on an airplane for 15 hours, especially when you're old. And
Right, yeah. Part of the reason right now is just along with age. She's about to be 90, but I'm sure even when you're in your 60s and 70s, it's probably old to sit on the plane for 14 hours. I'm 33. It was hard for me to sit on the plane for 14 hours to get over here, but at least there's a direct flight.
Yeah.
So, I think some of it is just losing contact with family and relatives, and then enough time goes by to where it's just kind of, it can be difficult to find a reason to return. And I know for me, this is my first time back in 5 years, but one of the biggest reasons for me to come back wasn't just to see Korea or eat food or go to Noraebang, but to see these people who I would consider myself still close with, despite not being in the same place, but we've kept in contact. And so when people ask me, well, why are you going back? Some of it was just to be here, return to a place that's special to me, but the biggest reason is to see a lot of people who are special to me, and I just want to continue to kind of sit at the same table as them, breathe the same air, eat the same food, that sort of thing.
As someone that just did that for 5 weeks with my brother, sister-in-law, and my mum and family, I can completely attest to how important that is, just to be breaking bread with each other, to be sat at the same table. Absolutely. We haven't got to the photos yet, so we did your grandfather out here. Did he have a pleasant experience of South Korea? I mean, some people, they come and they don't want to come back and things like that, just before we get to the photos. But what was your grandfather's experience of South Korea as an American?
Yeah. Well, I would think due to the fact that he ended up finding a wife and had a couple kids, and it was a good experience for the most part. I can't say too much, though, because he actually passed away before I was born.
Okay.
So in some ways, I tell people I got 3 things from my grandfather. One was the photos that ended up starting the archive. Another one was a name. His name was Blair as well. Technically a middle name, but everyone called him Blair for some reason. And then I was given his name as a memory. And then the other thing I say is I received his hairline, the genetics for that. So I've never had a chance to ask him directly, but I would imagine he had a good time. But part of the reason I say that is based on the type of photos he had taken. And someone who looked at these had remarked to me, there does seem to be a closeness and a sense of safety with a lot of these, because it's not just him kind of imposing himself into these buildings and taking quick snapshots of people looking over their shoulders or hiding their faces or running away. But a lot of them, and some of the most striking ones to me, appear to be street photography and street portraits, where people had to kind of stand there and pose for a time and recognize, here's someone who is asking something of me, but I'm also reciprocating. And so I would imagine, even though I do know he didn't speak Korean, and that's just from my grandmother saying it, but I do imagine that he knew how to handle himself in a way where he could receive that sort of he could give and receive as well. Yeah. And people were comfortable around him enough to pose for some of these photographs that to me are very, very striking.
And they're wonderful photographs. Can we talk about these photographs? Because they have that family connection, and then they've grown into something far bigger and perhaps, I'm not sure more important is the wrong word, but let's talk about the photographs, Blair.
Yeah. So for his photos, and like I said, initially, I think he always enjoyed art as a hobby for his day job. He was of the generation where it probably wasn't, chase your dreams. If you want to be an artist, just be an artist. But he knew, okay, let me get a real job working as an engineer. And he actually did quite well as an engineer because, again, he came from a family of farmers, and then ended up becoming a helicopter mechanic. He stayed with the U.S. military for a time, and I know on one occasion he was not stationed in Vietnam, but I guess he had such a rapport and such status where even though he was in the U.S., there was a general's helicopter in Vietnam that had broken down, and they flew him over.
Wow.
My mom has an article stating that, and so I think, well, there had to be somebody there who could have taken care of this, but for whatever reason they had him do that, and then eventually I think he worked at Lockheed Martin for a bit, and then worked on the Columbia space shuttle as well. So from someone who didn't go to college, he really made something of himself.
Beautiful.
But for the photos, again, even after he got back to the U.S., he took some photographs. I know he did a lot more painting and sketches, especially at that point. But the photographs were probably a way for him to stay engaged in art while he was here. And it's something that a lot of other American soldiers were able to do as well, just bring a camera and however many rolls of color film. So for him, yeah, he would just walk around the local neighborhood, take photos of things that he saw were interesting, maybe sites that were kind of similar to Utah, these sort of farmlands with a lot of mountains around, and then some of the people as well. And a few years ago, I ended up inheriting these. So growing up, I didn't know about the photos at all. I'd never seen them before. Even before going to Korea, I didn't know about the photos. It wasn't until after I lived here for 3 years, I went back to the U.S. for about a year and a half just to kind of compare life and visit family and all sorts of good things. I was living at home at the time, which my grandma also lived there. And one day she came in with just a cardboard box and said, "Hey, I know you like movies or pictures or whatever." She's not the most sentimental person, but your grandfather took these, so you might be interested in them. And I started going through, and I was amazed. First of all, because I recognized, wait a minute, okay, so these are 35 millimeter slides. I had seen 35 millimeter film before, but I had never actually seen the slides or put into a slide projector or anything. So it took me a moment to figure out exactly what I was looking at. But then I start going through, and I see some stuff that, yeah, looks like the U.S., maybe Utah or other national parks, because him and my grandma, they like going, just taking trips and seeing some of the national parks and nature around the U.S., which is one of the best things that the U.S. has to offer, all the national parks. But then I started noticing sites that look like Korea, right? The Hanbok, the Hanok. And again, this is all in color. And the color hardly faded through 60 years. And I'm going through and I said, wait a minute. He was in Korea 60 years ago, which means these were taken 60 years ago. And I'd never seen Korea that old in color.
Right.
My mind, anytime I thought about Korean history, it was in black and white.
Yep.
It was the war, things were difficult. But in these photos, yeah, maybe life was still difficult, but people are walking around, they're making something of themselves, they're smiling, they're finding ways to have fun and continue living. And these are all kind of like photographs of life. And again, in color, which I'd never seen before. And I thought, wow, that's so valuable and so special. So what I did was I ended up buying a nice scanner, made a lot of scans. When I moved back to Korea, it's easy to take the digital files, right?
Yeah.
The physical images themselves stayed back in the U.S., but I brought them over with me on hard drives and put a few on my phone and started just showing them to people because I thought, well, this is special, and I want others to see them as well. And nearly everyone had the same reaction, was that these are amazing, and I've never seen this part of Korean history in color. I thought, well, it's nice that I can share this with people. It's also, I felt a little bad because this is something I had direct access to, and easy access to, but so many didn't. So I kind of let that sit with me for a bit, continued living in Korea for a while, thought I was going to stay here forever. Didn't quite work out, but that's all right. Who knows what the future holds?
Yeah.
But then ended up moving back to the U.S. The pandemic hit, so I'm sitting there in my family's place thinking, okay, well, getting a job is a little difficult. I have a bunch of free time. What can I do? I could drink, I could play video games, or I can try to focus my efforts on something a little bit more important, something a little bit more personal. And so I said, well, okay, I have 300 images that my grandfather photographed. That's a pretty good start for any sort of project or archive. But if I want to do this, then I want to do it properly, and I want to make it meaningful. Something more than just like an Instagram page or a blog where I just say, hey, it's Korean history, and then there's an endpoint. I wanted to give these photos a way to kind of continue living and continue having an existence. Now, with my own personal work and career experience, one thing that came in handy quite a bit was I had actually volunteered at an archive for a couple of years during college. And during that time, I was just more of a library assistant, so I didn't have the direct knowledge of archiving, but I made some connections, and I got back in touch with those connections and said, hey, I'm wanting to make this a legitimate archive, or as legitimate as I can do it. I don't have that knowledge on my own, but I know you do. And they were more than happy to provide their expertise, so I would spend a month researching, coming up with a list of questions. We would have a nice phone call. And then I would take their responses, kind of further mold the archive, and then this was just a process of about, I want to say, a year and a half of just preparation, and then also started collecting some similar photographs, and formally formed the archive in 2021 in the fall, and it's grown from just the 300 photographs that my grandfather took to now I want to say on file we have 2,757, 58.
Wow.
And then another 1,000 that are just kind of sitting there and waiting to be scanned.
Isn't it amazing that your grandmother sat on these photos for, let's say, 60 odd years, and if she had given them to you in the 80s, or you wouldn't be, but if they had arrived in the 80s or 90s, you wouldn't have had the internet. There wouldn't have been scanners. There wouldn't have been these ways to sort of digitize and share. And there's a wonderful serendipity, or there's a wonderful moment of fortune, isn't there?
Right. No, exactly. And that's one way. It's kind of a big reason why I feel indebted isn't the right word, but I feel like everything to create the archive was put in place, right? Because again, I grew up. This is where some of my family is from, right? The first images were inherited. I had volunteered at an archive because of the particular major that I had, and that put me in contact with particular professors who connected me to the archive. And then I came here to Korea and had all these really valuable experiences, and kind of the entire time, everything I'm looking at, I have this, I'm carrying the family memory and the family heritage as well. And then finally to receive these images and return to some of the locations where for a time, my grandfather was there, but also knowing, oh, well, this is where my grandmother's from, it's where my uncle was born, where my mom was born. Like every step of the way, something was there. And sure, there was a lot of work as far as administration work and digitizing to make this an archive, but I didn't have to just pivot from any other thing, right? It's just as I'm living my life, everything kind of worked out in this way. And with timing as well, right? Because if I didn't move back to the U.S. before the pandemic hit, well, then this would have never happened because it took so long just to organize it and make everything proper. And so my perspective is, everything had to work out properly for this to culminate into what it has. And also there's a thought of, okay, my grandfather who took the first photos, he took them, stored them for about 30 years. My grandmother stored them and kept them safe for about 30 years. And actually, she didn't keep too many of his own personal possessions, even some of his artwork. There are a few sketches and a painting of just a duck in a river that my mom has framed, and that's always nice to look at.
Nice.
But as far as his artwork goes, she didn't keep too much, but she kept these. And I think some of that is because it's, for her, it's a memory, right? Not photos of a far off place, but it's the photos of her home country. But that's all to say. He kept these photos for 30 years. She kept them for 30 years. I figure, okay, I'm 33 now. Let me do this for another 30 years. And then at that point, maybe somebody else can step in. Yeah. But let me just kind of continue on this path that was sort of placed in front of me.
To talk, it's wonderful. To talk about the photos, 300 is quite a lot. I think about my time at university. I've got 3 or 4 photos. Cameras weren't a bigger thing, and so to have 300 photos and to have them in good quality, in color, of everyday Korean life, not of sort of battlefields and war, which is what we're used to from that period, and sort of the poverty. It's a wonderful start to the collection. Not only the quantity, but also the quality of the photos. Maybe we can speak a little bit about some of the photos, because I spent the night going through them, and I see them on Instagram as well. Talk to us about some of the photos, Blair.
Yeah, a few of the ones that really stuck out. One in particular would have been taken at Changdeokgung B1, the secret garden at one of the palaces here. Yeah. And it's everyone kind of, it's sort of a pavilion scene, right? Everyone is hanging out. There are people walking around, talking. It looks like just an area of rest. And that would have been one of the earlier ones I saw where I said, this is very, this one right here. This is very striking. That's something I looked at and said, okay, this is not the U.S. This is Korea in a way that I've never seen before. So that was a photo early on that really stuck out. And then these two that you see over here, the portraits of the two brothers. This would have been over in Incheon, Bupyeonggu, near Ascom City, where he was based. And it's a well-composed photograph. There's things going on in the foreground and in the background. Just where they're standing is also really nice. It's a piece of art. And then this photo as well with one of the members of a Pungmun Nori troupe, thinking, wow, look at those colors. I didn't know those colors existed here.
Yeah, he's rocking pink.
The pink. You know, someone had commented, this kind of looks like a, what was it, the earpad, iPhone, whatever they're called, AirPod case.
Oh, yeah, this thing.
Yeah. Someone had told me it's probably just a glasses case.
The detail of these photos, I never realized this was the secret garden.
Yeah.
And the amount, there's pink in this photo as well. Koreans were always known as being the people of white. They wore white, but the color and the everyday life is just wonderful. That I won't go too deep into these, but there's a guy called Roland Barthes, and he talked about in photos you find something called punctum, something that just catches your eye, and you can't describe what it is. But you look at some of these photos and you just want to spend some time poring over them. These are just cheap printouts that I have here, but hairstyles haven't changed much.
Right.
And the shoes that they're wearing, these, if you've ever gone to wear hanboks or do these things, you have to wear these very uncomfortable looking shoes, to be fair. They're nothing like what we wear today, but these young children here wearing these similar things.
Those were probably much more comfortable because they knew they had to wear them every day.
Yeah, not just for a dress up, but it's almost like you get to look through your grandfather's eyes, isn't it? To know that he took these.
Right. And more than just seeing the photos, but visiting these places in person, because that was the last thing I actually did in Korea. Was I said, okay, well, my time is coming to an end. I have these photos. Some of them I know where they were taken, right? Because it's very apparent. You could see Namdaemun, you know that it's Namdaemun. Others, it's kind of, okay, well, where is that? I don't know. It takes a little bit more work. So one thing I actually did was it really just started looking at his clothing, seeing the 8th U.S. Army patch on his arm, looking at, okay, well, where were these people located? And seeing during the years when he was here in Korea, that would have been Incheon, Bupyeong. So it was another moment that felt faded because I had many opportunities to visit Ascom City in Bupyeong during the months leading up to my departure. I kept on putting it off for one reason or another. The one day I went, it was actually open to the public. Wow. Because they were doing just kind of a history event saying, hey, usually this is off limits to everyone because at the time it was still technically a military base. But the one day I went, it was open. And they had many little displays set up. They're selling food around the baseball stadium, or maybe a baseball park is a better way to put it. And one of the exhibits actually had a lot of photos that looked similar to what my grandfather had taken. And so I went up and I asked the man who was kind of showing these off, and I showed him the photos that my grandpa had taken. And he said, oh, well, this one, I know exactly where it is. Here on Naver Maps, you just go here, and then there's an E-Mart, or this street, there's the intersection. These are the mountains, the Naujok, which is in the background there. So he kind of gave me a starting point, and I still had some time afterwards. So I went to those spots, and I got to stand in the same location where my grandfather was all those years ago. And that was really powerful because as I said, he passed away before I was born. In the U.S., I've been to his hometown before. I've been to his gravesite. But you go there and it's kind of, okay, yeah, here he is in the ground, passed away. Here in Korea, this is where he was alive.
Yeah.
And then as well, knowing that this was a place where, at least in Incheon, maybe not where my grandmother grew up, but where she lived a good part of her life and had some very important experiences that really altered the trajectory of her life and my family's history as well.
Yeah.
So it was just, that was really important for me to stand in the same spots. And yeah, it gave me that personal connection with my grandfather. And then it really showed me with my grandma that, okay, this is where she's from. This is kind of why she is the way she is, right? Because she comes from a completely different background than the one that I'm used to. But that was very meaningful as well, just because it was kind of the main reason why I was in Korea in the first place, right? I wanted to learn more about my family history and figure out some of what they might had experienced, or at least the type of life that part of my family was used to back then. And this was kind of how I ended that time.
You said it's affected or influenced your relationship with your grandfather and with your grandmother. How about with Korea?
With Korea, this has given me a way to stay deeply connected even after I left, which for me is very important, because whenever I lived here in Korea, I really only speak Korean. Most of my friends are Korean, and I feel very ingrained and in touch with the culture. And part of that's because a lot of people see me and they understand my history and the lineage, and so they welcome and they say, okay, well then you're one of us. And going back to the U.S., I just needed a way to keep that connection constant. And so, sure, it was a gift as far as historic materials go, but it was also a gift from my grandparents in a way that it helped me stay connected to a place that have a lot of family history, but I now have a lot of history here, and it's a place that's special to me.
Yeah. This intertwining of family and then the quality of these photos, because they're not just photos. They are sort of high quality, well taken images of a type of Korea that we don't normally get to see. And that's what makes it even more special. And so you said that you had phone calls with professors in order to try to archive them and to do something. So what was that next step? How did these start becoming in the format that they are today?
Some of that was just making sure that I had digitized these properly, because you can take a photo with the camera or with a phone or even a nice digital camera of these 35 millimeter slides, but they're not going to turn out too well, right? You need to make sure that the scanner you're using is a proper one and you're using the proper settings as well, because you can hit it on auto, but that's not necessarily an archival scan. So I remember one particular document. It was the National Archives and Records Administration in the U.S., their digitization guidelines. It's, I think, a 70 or 80-page document, and you just look up what type of material you have, and they say, okay, on the scanner, these are the settings that you need to use. So, like pixels, you need it this many pixels wide. You need to make sure that the auto contrast is set off. There's something called digital ice, which it removes dust, that sort of thing. But they say don't do that, because the idea is just to clean the images yourself with some non-abrasive special film cleaner and pads and all that. And then making sure that, whenever you make the scans, use these settings so that it's not just a pretty good scan, but the idea is that it's an archival scan. And so that it results in a very high quality image, and it also preserves as best you can the original, I want to say, artifact in a way.
Does scanning damage or influence the artifact in some way?
It can, but I'm fortunate in that most of these have retained their color pretty well. Kodak film itself retains color very well. I have a few slides that are not Kodachrome, Kodacolor, and they've since turned pink, because what's happened is the chemicals inside, I want to say it's blue, yellow, and red. You know, you mix those three colors and then you can get anything. With some films, the other colors fade away, so that's what's primarily left is the magenta or the red. And so when you look at the physical 35 millimeter slide, it's just all kind of pinkish. And I don't have the technical skills to adjust those colors and make them look as they would have been. But with a lot of these, it really doesn't take too much work because the color has sustained throughout all these years. Now, the black and white ones, because it's an archive, it's appropriate to not add any color, I think. But we still have a very good collection, a huge collection of original color images. So yeah, there's quite a bit you can do if you take very high quality scans. They just take a while. Each 35 millimeter slide, which is only about 2 inches wide by 2 inches tall, I want to say takes 2-3 minutes of just to scan. And so you click start, and for the scanner I can only do 4 at a time. But it's just you click and you wait for the light on the flatbed just to move down. You gotta be careful that you don't bump it, because then that messes it up too. And sometimes make a scan and realize the frame's a little bit off, and so let me readjust and do it again. But after about 1,000, you kind of get used to the process.
And it's amazing that these are the original color, because you talked about retouching things, and I see a lot of that online actually. It's becoming popular, and there's a lot of Instagram pages and channels and YouTube channels that do this, and it's nice. But this is where this is different, because you've preserved the color. Once you have all these, then you need to sort of collect them, and you've put them into folders and categories.
Right.
That's a really interesting part of it.
And it's also necessary because a perspective I have on making these public is it's not very useful just to say, hey, it's Korea, it's old stuff, enjoy. But it's important to put things in a way so that people who are looking for this type of material can find it. And so it doesn't just mean also highlighting, hey, this is the type of scene or this is a location, but adding keywords and knowing where to put it on the website so that, again, it's kind of useful to others. That's a real big perspective I have that kind of leads how I organize this, was thinking, if I was interested in Korea's photographic history or a particular subject within Korea's 20th century history, how would I know to find stuff like this? And some of that came from, quite frankly, looking at other archives or museums, their photo collections online, and seeing that maybe it wasn't the best organized, right? Because it's just kind of a page and you keep on scrolling down, but the keyword or the tagging systems may not bring you what you're looking for. So the idea is that every single photo there's an infinite number technically of keywords, but we have about 200 that I've developed. And that kind of goes back to, again, recommendations from the archivist who helped really push us in the right direction, because it's not enough just to say, well, a keyword can just be whatever keyword you want it to be. There are actual keyword, I want to say, maybe not programs, but archivists in the U.S. at least have developed specific lists and ways to categorize these images, where you can say, hey, if you follow this one standard procedure, then your list of keywords will correspond to what they have as well. And so you can tell an archivist, well, we use the FAST category system. And then they go, okay, so these are the types of keywords that we can expect. And I've had to change it a little bit, right? But that's generally what we do, which then just means on the website, it's divided by, galleries are divided by subject, and there are about 200 subject categories, and they start broad, but then they get very, very specific. There are location categories, which are always immensely useful, because someone says, I want to see what Seoul looks like, but maybe I want to see what Busan looks like, and they can see that. There are the year categories, which is pretty self-explanatory. There's the collection categories as well. And the collection is just a way to say this group of photos was taken by the same person or maybe a small group of people at the same time, the same place roughly. So they're all connected and there's kind of a story involved.
And you're creating paths in which people can begin to tell their own stories. It's nice, because if you just have 1,000 odd images, it's just information, but you need to tell a story, I think. You need a narrative director, and it's very interesting the way that you're doing that. One of the categories was sort of mixed race. So you've talked about the years, you've talked about collections. Can you maybe pull out a few of the other categories? Because that was quite interesting to me as I was looking through them.
Yeah. and for me, that's one, again, that's kind of the family history right there, right? Just being from a mixed race family in many different ways. But to see photographic evidence outside of my own family pictures was really powerful.
Right.
And I think it's especially powerful for other mixed race Koreans to see mixed race Koreans have been in Korea for a very long time. This isn't a new development. So it's important to, one, recognize that, and then two, try to delve into the history. One of the best usage cases for the archive has been last year. There's a book by Yuri Dulin, The First Amerasians, which is about the first generation of mixed race Koreans. We're happy to license him a few photos from our collection that appeared in the book.
Oh, cool.
And for me, reading the book was enlightening, not just in a historic way, but it gave me some answers about my own family history that I have not been able to get from my family. And that's actually something that I've heard quite often from others who look at these photos. People say, I've heard stories from my family about Korean history and our family history, but seeing it kind of reveals something. It reveals it in a new way that I haven't experienced yet. And then with the book as well, right? Knowing, hey, we contributed some photos, but also we're contributing to understanding and showing light on this history that hasn't been documented so much before. And it comes right back to me because I read the book, and again, it shows me my own family history. My mom read the book as well and kind of had walked away with the same impression, was that, yeah, there's some stuff in here that touches on probably what my grandmother and my grandfather experienced. And those are stories that they're not going to tell us, just because sometimes a difficult history you don't quite get into. But knowing that someone went through something similar, it kind of helps connect all of us and to each other and to the past as well.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I followed Yuri's work from afar. I've not read the book, but some really nice work that I see online. And I really enjoyed looking through some of those photos and hearing the stories and seeing the smiling faces of, you know, my children will grow up and they might have similar experiences or different because they come from a mixed family as well now. But to see it in color and to see it back then as well, it was really something. How did the collection then grow? Because you start off with this 300 and now it's into, I forget the number, 1,000 odd?
2,700.
2,700, I beg your pardon.
That's fine.
So how does it grow like that, Blair? What was the...
A lot of it is simply just on eBay.
Okay.
Knowing the search terms and then being someone who says, okay, well, I'm going to get this while the price is still low.
Right.
And there's a number of images that are kind of, I can't say traded, but what happens is someone who is a Korean War veteran has these photos, they pass away, maybe their family members don't have quite the same connection to Korea that we do, so they're sold at an estate sale, and they pass hands a few times to either private collectors or private resellers. They make their way on eBay, and with my perspective is, okay, I'm not going to get everything because I'm not a rich man, but I can get some stuff, right? And at least then put it in a publicly accessible way so that they're useful for others and so that these images can keep on surviving. So that's one method. Other methods are antique shops, which I have not had success at an antique shop out in the wild yet, but the U.S. has this other type of event called militaria shows, where people who collect military related items, most of the time it's badges, helmets, uniforms, sometimes weapons as well, and every once in a while they'll have photos. But what happens is these militaria shows, people will show up, they'll have a table about as big as this, just lay out all of their wares, and for a day people come by, buy, trade, sell. And so I've had some success at one of those, actually, just kind of going through and seeing, hey, this is an album that it wasn't just taken by a U.S. soldier who was maybe in Germany, because there's a lot of that as well, but seeing, well, this is Korea, okay, well, let's get it and add it to the collection.
What's that culture like? I mean, my mind's immediately going to sort of bargain hunt in the United Kingdom or porn stars in the in the United States. Not those porn stars, the other porn stars. Yeah. What I mean, can you say anything about the culture of buying these things on eBay or going to these places where people sell their wares?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not too far into that culture. I tend to just dip my toes in and back out because it's I don't have too much experience getting too deep in. But then I've been really fortunate that I've actually had some people reach out as well and want to just donate images, which is always very nice because they see that this isn't just a collection, but that there's value for the archive, and knowing that somebody sees that as well and recognizes it and wants to contribute. So we've had a few cases of that also, and I'm working on kind of finalizing some of those donations. Sometimes people offer and then they decide, no, maybe I want to just give this to my children and have them hold on to it, which I understand, right? Because in one way, these are a lot of like family heirlooms and treasures. But in the cases where someone recognizes that, hey, yeah, we don't have quite the connection that you do, so let's make sure that we put these in a way where the images continue on living and they have value for others.
And they have value for others, and they go to great use because they help people. Even if it's not a photo of your family or if you weren't there, it helps in a way. It's hard to explain how that works, but it does, because when you see personal stories or photos, it resonates more. I don't know why or how that does work, but it's certainly something. There was, with these growing like this into your archive, what has been the reaction from people? So I'm thinking here, before we were recording, we spoke about Sok Ji-hoon and grandmother or American military people. Has there been much response to it? There has, because I've seen your Instagram account.
Yeah. I think the biggest response right now has been with the Korean American community. So there's a growing following here in Korea. Some of the reason why that has been slow was because about a year ago I decided for the algorithm just to release posts and social media in English. What I used to do was I would release it within the same post. Okay, it's Korean followed by English. Okay. And I think at that point the algorithm doesn't really know who to send it to, so it doesn't quite take off. Once I started making some videos kind of explaining more about my family history, my family story, and sticking with one language, then it really took off. So right now, that's where the biggest audience is, I would say, within the Korean American community. And I know for them, one reason why Korea is so special is because it is the birthplace for a lot of their families, but they've also been, much like my family, removed for a very long time. So there's kind of a looking at and a longing at and a wanting to understand maybe what could have been, or maybe just a gratefulness as well to see where they came from, where like my family came from, knowing, okay, this is what grandma experienced, but because of the decisions she made and because of the decisions my grandfather made, now this is the life that I get to live.
Yeah. Having spoken to many sort of Korean Americans and Korean adoptees as well, people that left the country for various reasons, it's interesting to me, I'm not sure what your take on this might be, Blair, that Korea's success, cultural success, economic success, has then given them the confidence to come back and explore that Korean part of their identity. That it's, I don't want to say it's cool to be Korean, but they feel now that they want to explore it because it's become, it's entered the global consciousness a bit more than it was in the past. Any thoughts on that? How?
Yeah. I think maybe with the adoptee community and the Korean American community, or all these communities throughout the diaspora, maybe more than Korean culture as a concept, it's just time has passed. Enough time has passed for us to all kind of look back and ask some of these questions that the people ahead of us couldn't. There's a quote that I ended up encountering while making the archive, and this was about the who would it have been about? I think the Jewish diaspora, and it was what the father wishes to forget, the son wishes to remember. Something kind of like that, right?
That's nice.
And anytime there is a traumatic event that a generation has to go through, which in this case is the Korean War, right? It was a war, but it was also a refugee crisis, and the country was split in half, and it was never resolved. And so there's all this trauma that has been carried on, and a lot of very painful memories that have just, in order to survive, were pushed aside. And so I know the preceding generation, my parents' generation, that wasn't really the time to ask questions, right? But now, because time has passed, we can kind of ask these questions and delve into the history and try to, maybe we'll never heal some of the pains that occurred, but we can try to resolve some issues that arose from what happened back then.
Yeah. I think it takes a lot of courage to do this, yeah, and maybe time does help. Similar to what the father wants to forget, the son wants to remember. There's life must be lived forward but understood backwards. So we're going through all of these things, and you can't really stop sometimes. You need to just survive. You need to go, and then with hindsight and with time and distance, you can look back and then try to understand everything that's taken place. Is there a difference between this is an aesthetic art question, I think. Is there a difference between these and the photos we take today on our smartphones?
The biggest one is that these come from and are recorded to a physical artifact, right?
Yeah.
Which in some ways means you have to be a little bit more careful and particular with what you're photographing.
Right.
Because nowadays you take a selfie, if it doesn't look good, you can take 20 within 2 seconds, right? You just set the timer and it snaps like that. With these, you really need to say, okay, what do I think is important enough to photograph? But then there's also the issue of needing the I guess the skills as well to make sure that what you imagine and what you've actually captured are different. But that's probably what, in some ways, it makes it difficult to build the collection because we are 100% built through these physical artifacts. That's kind of the best way to look at it, right? Rather than just a photo, it's a photographic artifact that these come from, whether it's a 35 millimeter slide, a photo print, or in some cases an 8 millimeter reel. As opposed to nowadays when, it's just a single person can take thousands and thousands and thousands of photos. And to be quite frank, I wouldn't know how to archive those just because the scale is way too much. But it really allows us to kind of focus in on a particular photo and dive deeply.
Can you say something about the reels? I was watching one on your YouTube channel about a Korean jazz club in the 1960s. So it's gone. Your archive has gone beyond photos to moving images.
Yeah. So whenever we started, the idea was, well, it's just the rarity of film at that time, right? 8 millimeter, 16 millimeter. I don't think anyone had 35 millimeter unless they're working in the Korean version of Hollywood at the time. But as far as amateur film goes, there was the ability to buy these 8 millimeter and I guess small gauge film reels that you could bring over and record. But again, it just meant that more people were taking still photographs. That being said, we do have a small but growing 8 millimeter film collection. So the first one is online right now on YouTube in full. At first, we thought that it was filmed in Daegu, 1952. We still know it's Daegu, but the year may have moved up a little bit earlier.
Okay.
Because when you look at these reels, you can pull them out and see that Kodak actually has the date, not the date printed, but they use symbols that signify what year it was printed.
Okay.
And so one of your previous guests, Sok Ji-hoon, he was looking at it. I brought these reels to him the other day.
The actual reels he was looking.
Yeah, I brought these with me to Korea. He was looking at them, and with the Daegu film, he said, well, this actually looks like it was printed in, I want to say 49. Wow. Which means that, it's not just 52, but this is Korea in the 40s, late 40s, but still in color. Daegu, people just walking around, going to the local, I guess, train station because that's kind of the hangout spot in a way that people don't hang out at the subway station nowadays. It's more of cafes or going to the local markets instead of the E-Mart and getting to see that. And it's a much different feeling to see moving pictures over just still photographs. It's like both of them show life, but one of them it's the time, right? It's the existence that you can see moving from one moment to the next, to the next, to the next, because this is all captured, and you realize that this is it's a time machine in a way, right? It was recording both the place, which you get in the photo, but the time as well.
How do you navigate the balance between try to keep it authentic, but try to make it appealing for viewers online?
The authenticity comes from the fact that we don't adjust the images too much. If it's original color, okay, we'll do things to bring them out, but it's still, the color is represented by the physical artifact. If it's black and white, just leave it in black and white. But there are ways that we can kind of make it fun. through just Instagram. Sometimes it's a matter of adding music that kind of fits with the image and uploading it. Sometimes for the reels, and when I say reels in this case, I mean Instagram reels, kind of telling a story as well. And sometimes it could be a fun story. So that's probably the main delineation, is treating the images with sanctity, but then finding occasions when appropriate to add some of the more modern perspectives and what might hit people. But as you've marked on earlier, it's really a lot of storytelling as well that people appreciate. So that's been the biggest path forward as far as releasing this material, is figuring out what's kind of the story that is being told, and whether it's a single image or a collection, right? A collection, again, we know that they're taken all kind of around the same place at the same time by the same person. So what happens from one photo to the next, to the next, to the next? What's the history there that we can convey to people nowadays and kind of show this is why it's important?
Yeah. I think the beauty of the moving images, the Daegu street and the jazz clubs, is that I often have to convey to young adults coming to Korea for the first time, and they exist in a world of coffee shops and 5G technology. It's my job to try to convey what it used to be.
Right.
To try to give them some scope and some distance and some perspective. And, you know, that there are many ways to do that. But because they're very much a visual generation, that they understand things through reels, Instagram reels and TikToks, the videos that you have and the images are so helpful for that. I realized as I was thinking about the new semester that I want to show these to people, right? I want to say, look at these things. This is what Korea was, not what Korea wanted to show to the world. It's not sort of a manufactured or produced or polished version. It's voyeurism in a way, almost.
Yeah.
And that's nice.
No, that I like the way you put it. It wasn't necessarily what Korea wanted to show to the world, which in this day and age, especially in Seoul, being an international city, in some ways, yes, it's still very Korean, but it also has to exist for the world, which means that some things are kind of pushed aside and some things are lifted up in a way that maybe naturally it wouldn't have arisen without the hands of economics.
Yeah. What happens next with all of this? Where do you go with this? Because it's already a fabulous thing. It's grown from your grandmother walking into a living room and dropping a box of 300 to where you are now. So it's already a fabulous journey. And then what happens next, Blair?
On one hand, keep doing the thing we've been doing, right? Just collecting more, making very good scans, organizing it in a way that's helpful for others, putting them on the website, releasing the material in the world, advertising on Instagram and YouTube and all that. When I say advertising, I don't mean the paid advertising. It's just, that's kind of what social media is in a way, right? It's all just advertising. So that's one path. The other path that I think is equally important is to get these in the hands of people who, whether it's through academic projects or artistic projects, have something to say through these images. Because my perspective is, well, before I left Korea, going around to the places my grandfather photographed, I was just going on my own to look. But before I left, I brought a camera with me, and I made a film kind of about that experience, looking for the places where he was, but then also understanding what Korea was at the same time. And I walked away with that after making the film thinking, this was very important for me, and I think it's something that should be available to others in a way. So that's kind of the two-tier approach of the archive is, on one hand, simply collect, preserve, publish. The other hand, find artists and academics who can use these and can show something about Korean history that we weren't aware of before, right? Like the book, The First Khmer Asians. You can think of a filmmaker friend of mine, Choi Hee-hyun, who does a lot of films, a lot of experimental and art house films about just looking and what is photography, what is an image. And she'd use many of our photos, specifically the ones of American soldiers who were hanging out with Korean women in the bars and some of these, what's the word that I'm looking for? Like camptown women, for lack of a better term, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is kind of, those in particular are a little problematic because these are women who did not have families to support them, probably because they were lost during the war and they just needed a way to survive. And then you have men coming in and using them in some ways. And you can tell in some of these photos, they probably didn't want to be photographed. But it's important that it's there, right? Yeah. We need to confront that, hey, these are things that happened and they led to problems that we haven't resolved yet. So let's figure out a way to resolve them. And the starting point is just by getting them out there in a tactful way, but working with others who also have that perspective and the what's the word I'm looking for? Know how to appropriately put these things out there, right? Like I'm the one to make a film about looking for my grandfather's photography in Korea. I'm not the one to make a film about what it was like for these camptown women, but there's a Korean friend of mine who is the one to make that film. Or there's an author, Yuri, who knows about the history of mixed race Koreans, and he can be the one to use the photos of the mixed race Koreans or the bicultural families.
Before we talk about Trace It or your film, with the camptown women, it's obviously a very sensitive subject, and it still exists today. But what I found so wonderful looking through the archive is that rather than it being political, emotional, ideological, all of these things, instead all of a sudden I was looking at people. And I was looking at real people and looking at their clothes and the way they were dressed, and it wasn't a battle anymore. It still should. I'm not saying that that's how other people should approach it, but I could see people. And because I could see people, then I could see myself, and I could see people around me, and it was a mirror almost. Right.
Yeah. Looking at the photos and realizing that this wasn't, even though the photo is a one-time moment, this person wasn't just a one-time moment, or they're not a figure representing a movement. Yeah. They had a whole life behind them. Actually, there's a series of photos that for me were very revealing because it is of a woman who is a camptown woman, but then I have a photo from her several years previously, and it's a portrait. And, you know, if she had a portrait taken of her when she was younger, it looks like she was a teenager at the time. Her family was probably had a little bit of money. That's something that you don't do if you're from a poor family. And then there's that jump forward to where she's actually, there are photos of her in the background where it's kind of at a, I want to say an American like GI bar, right? And so you only have American soldiers and Korean women. And we all know why they were there, but she's there in the background. And then there are a few other photos where they're outside, probably on another day, a few Korean women and American soldiers all hanging out. And because that one in particular, it's kind of a series, right? There's the, what we're thinking is pre-Korean War photograph and then post-Korean War photograph where she is working in a camptown. What had to happen between then? A lot of pain and trauma and hardship, but there's a whole life there. Yeah. And she was important to someone, and she was important to herself, and her life had meaning. And so even though it is a sensitive topic, it's, as you said, it's important to look at these photos and say, these were people, and they were us. And there's not much of a difference between the people who were alive back then and us. I guess time is the only difference.
And the thing that looks out from behind our eyes is the same thing that looks out from behind their eyes. You know, we are human. There is that connects us, and that's it shows the multifaceted dimensions to this project that started so very personal and then has grown. You said about making a film. The archive itself, I'm not sure if it would have worked the way it's done without your personal story. If it was a normal person doing the archive, that's not to say it can't work, but I think your personal story and the way you describe it and the way it's played out and the bravery with it, that adds to everything. So you said that you were walking the steps trying to make a film, because when I see these, the question I want to ask you is, do you take photographs now?
Used to, yeah. Not so many even more. Nowadays, most of the photographs I do is just working with images rather than taking my own. And in the past, my goal in life was to be a filmmaker. So that's what I studied when I was in college. I did directing and film criticism. So a lot of watching films and writing about them and then making them. And my idea was, after graduating, that I was just going to work in the film industry, no matter where I was. But I moved to Korea after I graduated, and so a lot of my work experience here was doing freelance kind of video production, small scale, but on the side working on my own films. And then all that experience from just being a staff member with the cinematography team, or having to edit projects, because when you're working on a short without much money, the more people you hire, the less everyone makes, right?
Yeah.
So there's the idea of, okay, well, let me learn how to edit as well and bring this to completion. So, yeah, when I had left Korea, I said, well, I've been here for 4 years in total, and I was wanting to be a filmmaker here. Didn't quite work out, but I can still leave with my own project. And at that point, yeah, I had already inherited the photos. I had seen the locations that my grandfather photographed. So I had all these experiences, and I'm not one to bring around a camera with me even now and say, well, let me record life while it's happening. It's more I just want to experience life, take something away. And then if I want to make a film, these days I don't really want to make too much films just because the archive is my main focus. And then in some ways, like YouTube, uploading a video about the archive, it's sort of a film in a way. But with that one, with Traces, yeah, that was kind of my, at the time, maybe not my goodbye to Korea, but this is what I'm going to leave with, something very, very deep and personal. So it's a film about a man who, it's me, I'm unnamed in the film. I didn't want everything to be about Blair's walking around Korea. It's not that type of story. It's just about a man looking for the location where his grandfather took a portrait. And in the meantime, he finds his way into an old military base, and he kind of sees the remnants of a lot of these foreign powers who have come into the country, molded it in a certain way, and had an impact that still exists today. But even outside of that kind of foreign influence, there's this idea of the history and the modern exist side by side if you know what you're looking for. So for me, that was the seminal experience as far as working with the images and understanding, okay, it's important for others as well to have that same experience, like being a filmmaker and hanging out with artists, having a lot of artist friends, knowing that this could be valuable for them both personally, but then also in a way where they can make something that, again, it kind of puts it out into the world and allows others to interact in a way that, like with good art, it all comes back to the person who's indulging with it.
The most personal is the most universal, they say sometimes, when you have the courage to do those things. I just want to, as we're this far in, just relate one story perhaps, because last semester I watched with my students 국제시장, Ode to My Father, a Korean movie. It's the Korean Forrest Gump. And people have different opinions about it, but in a university classroom, people know it's not real history, but it gives a very big, broad overview, and it does it, and it really resonates with young people. And I had a young French Vietnamese student in class, and he watched it, and in the second half of the semester all my students have to do a small video project rather than do a presentation in class because they suck. Like, make something and we'll do it. And he made this wonderful video about how watching Ode to My Father in class, a movie about Korea and Korean history, helped him understand his Vietnamese father. He sees himself as French. He's grown up in Paris. He's French. He's not Vietnamese in that sense, but how watching a Korean film helped him understand his own Vietnamese father, and he made a movie about this. And when we're watching it, there were Indonesian girls in the class crying. And I just got everybody to stop after that and thought, just look at what art and images and things can do, that you all come from completely different places, and this and a story can affect so many people. I think it's a beautiful thing, Blair. As we bring this perhaps towards the end, is there anything that else you would like to say about the archive or to put out there at the moment?
put me on the spot with that question.
Obviously, people should go online and look at Korean Image Archive and start looking at their own categories. Is there any other information? And the YouTube channel?
We got a Patreon if people want to contribute financially.
Yeah.
There was a,
Nice.
who would that have been? I can't remember who the author was, but there's this line of like, you don't do service to an author by reading their work, you do service by buying their book. And for me, I think, hey, yeah, I want to put all this out into the world. Yeah. We do have expenses, right? Yeah. And most of the archive is funded through my own funds, my own pockets. But no, outside of that, I think it's just valuable for people to see these, and I'm really appreciative of the following that we have and such the relationships it has brought to me, and the communications, and just the doorways that it has opened up, and the ability to stay connected to a place that's very important to me. Because again, it's my family history, but I've been here too now for a while, so it's my history too. So yeah, I would say maybe the one thing, if any listeners know someone with this type of material that hasn't been properly archived, maybe just get in touch with us.
Yeah. That's. I hope people do, and for those that want to support Blair, he likes boricha, so send him some money on Patreon, and you can buy some boricha. Yeah. Let's end this, Blair, with some recommendations, some movies, some books, some songs, and anything like that for the people listening. Please.
Yeah, I'll recommend some music. I don't watch too many films these days, so some albums that I've liked recently. First one would be Planetary Unfolding by Michael Stearns, Stearns, sort of like ambient space music, very relaxing. It's one that starts a little bit small and then moves further and further out to the whole universe, I want to say. And then another artist who I've really enjoyed over the past few years is Jackie Levin. He's a Scottish blues singer, not very famous, but very prolific. He came out with, I want to say, over 20 albums, and some of them he released under a different name, a pseudonym, because the distribution company said, well, you can't release so many within a short amount of time. So, okay, well, what if we just call me something else? And I said, okay, that we can do. And I take a lot of inspiration from people who are prolific in the way where maybe they're not looking for perfection in their work, but they're looking for something that's very personal and true, and just keep on putting it out there. And in one way, the archive, because there's so many photos, that's kind of the mindset I have, is that anytime there's a collection release, right, it's like in the past, a new movie premieres or a new book comes out. Well, for us, we get new photos to share with the world and get to illuminate a little bit more of Korean history.
And that's what you've done. You've illuminated Korean history. It's brilliant.
Thank you.
Blair, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. And relax. Okay. First, brilliant. You know, when you said music, I was like, I wonder what Blair listens to. And when you said ambient space music, I was like, yeah, that really fits in what I would imagine it would be.
There's one artist who I was thinking of, but it's on the harsher side. It's more of like ambient black metal. So, Paysage d'Hiver. I'll spell it, yeah. Paysage, and then d'Hiver. It's very loud and rash, and so with that one I'm a little more careful of. But what I've discovered is that a lot of metal can become very ambient, because you're just layering these musics, and the screaming isn't necessarily a lyric, but it's just another tone. And that artist in particular decided to just go all the way kind of back to ambient, and so I've really gotten into them recently. And it's another kind of similar artist to Jackie Levin, where someone just said, I'm going to come up with albums on my own and make music on my own, and just put things out into the world and see what happens.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing to do that, because you need to encourage creativity. Things don't need to have 100 million views to be good.
Right, and they don't need perfection as well.
I agree. They just need to be sort of honest, and this is what I think or feel right now. Here it is.